What's going on? It's Nick, and today is a great episode of Zero to Infinity, and this is a show all about and dedicated to uncovering how to create a successful business, inspiring those around you and us and everyone looking to start or scale their business and bring it to the next level. Today, I'm joined by Arjun Bhatnagar, and he describes himself as a venture capitalist, a product designer, solutions architect, and senior developer, and an innovator, of course. That's one of the big reasons why he's here, his innovation skills. Arjun is a senior technology advisor at Creative Chaos, co-founder and chief executive officer at Cloaked, and a partner at RallyCry Ventures. He is also the executive director of Ira Jaan. Did I pronounce that right?
Yes.
Excellent. Their mission is to broaden a person's skill set in order to access a wider and more global job market by empowering underserved communities through education, technological literacy, and economic development. I know that's a good one. Their nonprofit has successfully built one school in Bulacan, Philippines, and is on to building its second one in the mountains of Capas, Tarlac in the Philippines as well. How's it going, Arjun? Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is your intro. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I know. We gotta spice things up and make sure people are on their toes. So yeah, I just want to bring you on today to talk to the crowd, talk to everyone that's watching, all about entrepreneurship, where you began, your history. We're going to dive into how you do it, where you find the time to make everything happen, your multiple companies, things like that. So let's just back up for a second. Where did you grow up? Tell us a little bit of a backstory and also the inspiration behind your entrepreneurship. Most people will just say, let's get a 9-to-5 job and call it a day for our career. But there are some of us that just say, let's do this on a different level. So where did this all come from?
Sure. So thinking back, so I'm from North Andover, Massachusetts, born not too far from here in Lowell, grew up most of my life in North Andover. When I was younger, I lived a few different places, but spent most of my life in North Andover. I think entrepreneurship has come. I remember when I first heard the word entrepreneur. It was in the 3rd grade. There was somebody who came into our classroom and she introduced herself and said, "Hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm an entrepreneur." And I was like, "Oh, that's an interesting word. I've never heard that word before." But I still remember that first moment. And I think, I don't think that it correlated, but I'd say my entrepreneur journey began in the 3rd grade itself, when I realized that everyone around me loved Pringles and sour cream and onion Pringles. And I realized slowly that, and my teacher at the time, she actually rewarded you for reading books, for doing things in the classroom, etc. What we call Disney dollars. And the idea was that you could trade them for prizes, whatever. And I kind of learned without knowing what the words meant of supply and demand. And then when you limit supply, how it affects demand. I remember I'd mess around where I used to trade Pringles or Pringle cans for Disney dollars. People would buy them off of me. But I'd intentionally limit supply sometimes, where I'd say, you know what, I want to eat the Pringles today. I'm not going to trade it. If I did that enough days in a row, I could actually trade one whole Pringle for 5 Disney dollars, because people started really missing or craving Pringles. And it got to the point where at the end of the year, you had to trade dollars, and the second place person had around 50 Disney dollars, but I had about 100 plus, 150 plus.
Oh.
And it was I think my first taste, but I never actually chased the idea of money, but more of the idea of creating or doing things that people enjoyed. I think that was kind of where my entrepreneur journey always began. And it started, I think, when I was really young with my dad. I think my whole career has been shaped. It's really, the word career has actually been an interesting thing. I've been thinking about it lately. It's like, well, I guess I do have a career. It's in tech. It's across different things. But it started when I was 5, 6, when my father is in technology. He's always built things himself. And I think it's always been a source of inspiration for creating. But I was exposed to, and where my duality comes in, is that at 6, I remember traveling in India and seeing people who were on the sidewalk, or people who were living on the streets. And I remember seeing like, wow, my parents always say never waste food because people are always struggling. And I saw that firsthand at 6. And I thought, well, it'd be nice to help somebody like that. And I think that's always played a significant role in my life. But yeah, and then seeing my dad and him being an engineer himself, talking about building or creating and showing me around MIT when I was really young was a big influence. But there's been actually numerous moments throughout my lifetime that kind of shaped what I wanted to do. But I can jump into any of them. You can
absolutely, yeah, dive in. I'm particularly, maybe we can start at the beginning with your father. It sounds like he was kind of one of those pillars of inspiration for you, maybe instilling some lessons about entrepreneurship and life lessons and things like that. Is there anything that you can remember that may be helpful to share?
Yeah, when I was really young, I think, as I said, my dad took me and my brother. Actually, my brother was not there yet. I was really young, so took me, and I think either went to a museum or something, and he showed me what it like. Either we were walking around, he showed me either Inventions MIT or the Media Lab or whatever it was, and it's like these are all things that people create. And I can't remember too much. I was really young, but I remember the impact of seeing, wow, these are things people create. And I think the idea of entrepreneurship, at least from my father's side, he runs his own company. And the idea, seeing him our whole life, even my investors for my current startup, they ask, how did you get to what you're doing today? Because they know a lot of Indian families or even children born in Indian families, there's very strict path going into getting your degree, getting a specific job, building your career up, but don't tinker too much in entrepreneurship or going towards being a doctor.
Right.
And I
play it safe. Right?
Yeah, play it safe. And I think one thing that my family definitely allowed me to do is experiment. Never lose sight of academics, but it was that the freedom to explore and try things that I wanted to do. And that lasted my whole life, which allowed me to really experiment and try and really tinker around and learn as much as I could. Yeah, so I think my father and his whole life, he's been, at least in my life, been running his own company. And that I guess played a big impact. But I know it only built after one after another, the different events that have kind of occurred or jumping from one thing to the next.
Yeah, it sounds like, a lot of people have like a hesitancy, or I think my camera's blurring there because the hand motion got this thing. But a lot of people have hesitancy to start their own business or to dive into something new or take the risks and stuff like that. But you seem to have jumped pretty easily from one to the other to the next. Do you feel like as an entrepreneur, maybe your upbringing, something like that, that risk was always just part of the deal and just part of doing business? In general, like it seems like you're sort of a little desensitized to it. If I'm a little bit.
I would say not as much desensitized, but I think the fear of trying.
The fear of it. Yeah, the fear of it. Yep.
I'd say it's built on top of a lot of either values and experiences that I've had. I think one of the things that, if you talk about family, my mother is someone I know who is a bit fearless in a lot of dimensions. So no matter who it is or anyone, she's never let anyone wrong her. And I think the idea of strength in oneself has been imbued. There's a story where I remember when we were traveling to India when I was young, when we were at the Taj Mahal visiting, it was our first time visiting, and you're supposed to have like a full day or many hours to visit there. But randomly they decided to just shut the whole event down. I shut the visiting early, and there were like hundreds of people out there, and they closed the door. My mother was in front of like hundreds of people, yelling and yelling at these police officers, saying, "We paid for this. We were supposed to be here." And initially I thought I was nervous. I'm like, "Oh, why are you up there? Everyone's looking at you." But I remember seeing the sight that after a couple of minutes, people cheering her on as she's like standing up for everybody, and it made me think a lot about fighting what's right. But in terms of the fear, and when I started getting to the career, it's everything I've done. It was always a leap of faith. My whole intro to my whole technology side of things started when I was 10 years old. When I remember when I went to a sleepover, and my friend had brought it to his room and said, "Hey, look at what I did." And he showed us a website. And at that time at 10, we were blown away that he had a website, he had made it. And I always felt that I knew a bit more about technology. I knew how to take apart a computer. I was really interested in how computers worked. I used to play games when I was, but I never knew anything about building websites or programming or kind of building things. So I went home or after the sleepover, and I was a bit jealous. I was like, how could he build a website? So I'd spent 4 hours and grabbed a notebook and meticulously took notes on HTML and CSS. And 4 hours later, I managed to build and deploy a website. I was really proud of it. I remember that moment. I found out later that my friend had used a drag and drop program to build websites, where I didn't know that. So I went home and actually learned how to build. But there was a mindset of, well, it's okay if I don't know it. I can learn. I can figure out how to do something. I think that kickstarted everything. I guess that kickstarted my whole career, because after that, I just kept learning and tinkering wherever I could, from building websites or building in terms of apps, things that I thought might be fun. And I started weaving my way into entrepreneurship. When I was 11, I had started building some websites, having some experience. And I started to actually say, like, put myself out there and say, hey, I'll build your website. And I started actually making sales. My first I put myself out there everywhere and started getting some cold emails, or I started doing some outreach. But I remember I got my first sales with this woman. She wanted me to build her website, and I was talking on the phone with her, and she was we were talking about something, and she said, oh, sorry, I still remember this because I was on my on my chair drinking a Capri Sun, and I remember we were talking, and she said, oh, my 3-year-old's running around. And I said to her, oh, same here all the time. I know that feeling. And I was like, I was 11. But it was a good moment. And I built her website, got my first payment, but there was always I was not afraid of that to just lean into whatever I was trying to do.
So you're 11 years old, selling websites. I got to keep my hand away from the camera here. Selling websites and making it happen at 11 years old.
I remember it clearly. Yeah, it was a fun experience. I was building websites, started doing some cold calls to build websites for other people, and then I started learning about databases and trying to build games for me and my friends to play.
Huh. And where did it go from there? Because you and I eventually met at Babson College.
Yeah.
What was leading up to you did undergrad there?
Yes.
Right. And what was leading up to there? Were you still running a business in high school, things like that?
So there were a couple key moments before I got into Babson. So not too far off from 11. When I was 13, I became a lot smarter in technology. I was working at a company, got my first job fixing computers. For $25 a computer, I'd be brought in, like either an employee left or something was broken, I'd repair and fix the computer. But eventually I actually heard the teams talking about a problem they were facing about, well, people use their software, but they don't know how to collaborate. And so like on it, or they used email, it's really clunky. So Facebook wasn't really that big at the time, but I knew of Facebook. And I said, hey, why don't you use a social network and integrate your software into a social network? I overheard them and kind of mentioned it to them. And so that's cool, but it's not doable. It sounds like really complex. And I said, well, I could do it. And at the time, I actually didn't quite know PHP that well or know databases, but I said, well, I could do it. And they said, sure, you could try. And I spent that time really learning databases, really improving my website design skills and PHP altogether. And I managed to, in a couple of months, build and recreate Facebook as a website. And this company actually managed to use it to get a $2 million grant.
Holy wow.
So it led that was like my first instance. I was like, well, it's okay if I don't know something. I can just say yes and give it a shot.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
and there's that fear. There's that no fear sort of thing where, you're seizing the opportunity, taking advantage of what's presented in front of you and saying, I can turn this into something.
Yeah, that was like the first big instance where I had no fear. I did a couple times in some other projects I was working around with, but on another big instance before I got into Babson and my first startup, actually, before that was 17. I was working, I was at Governor's Academy, which is a high school, a private high school. I actually switched from public to private, asking my parents to let me switch, and that's trying to find a way because I actually wanted to find a new environment where there are more people like me who want to build and try to create things. Mm-hmm. And my senior year of high school, I actually came in and I got an email from the art director, and we were close. I actually never taken an art class yet there. I switched schools, but we still were friendly and knew each other. And he had emailed me saying, hey, come to my office. I want to show you something. So I came to his office and he said, hey, take a look at this 3D printer. And printers weren't that big at that time, but they were really expensive. Now they're pretty cheap. And so I was like, wow, this is really cool. I'd love to take a class to learn how to use a 3D printer. I knew nothing about 3D printing or how even 3D design was done. And he said, oh, that's great, because we don't have any class. I was like, wait, what do you mean? He's like, well, you're going to actually figure it out. I actually couldn't believe it. And so he had taken money out of the art department budget without telling anyone, really, or because he's director, he made the decision, and he just bought it. And he expected me to figure it out and actually build some knowledge around it for the school. And what I had done then, I spent my fall learning 3D design, 3D printing, how to properly do it. And by the late fall, getting into winter, we actually got a call. Well, the school got a call from a teacher in the area, and that teacher had said, "Hey, we heard you got a 3D printer. We'd love to work together. Could you connect me to the faculty who's running it? Because my son, we want to work on building something for my son." And the school said, "There's no faculty who runs it. There's a kid named Arjun. You can talk to him." And so we connected actually, and found out that his son has amniotic band syndrome and actually couldn't grow fingers. And so as a result, he wanted to work on building him a prosthetic hand. And I had said, "Sounds good." And I knew nothing about it. And based on things we discovered, based on math on his knuckles, designing from some base prints we found online, modifying, tweaking, designing myself for him, we managed to actually, by getting to spring, build him a fully working prosthetic hand where, based on the wrist movements and the tension, we using fishing line on where his fingers would be to actually pick and grab things. And it left a big impact on me. And I actually say this to companies I advise, that is the first time where I had built something where it actually made a big impact in someone's life. And I can say that because after that project, I found out later that's a PBS show entirely based on the work I had originally started. And then that school got major funding. That teacher, the school he worked at, got funding to get 14 or 12 3D printers and build a whole curriculum around it. And every year they actually worked on building the son, as he grew, a new hand every year based on the work I originally started.
That's incredible.
So that left a big impact on making sure whatever I do always had an impact. So I'm not building tech for the sake of tech. I'm also never looking to just chase money because I want to make some money. More about making something that makes an impact, has value. Money and success, all that kind of will follow if you're actually taking on a problem head on.
That dives right into my next series of questions here, all about what drives you. And you hit it right in the head. I think you're right. You're driven by the results, the passion, the helping others, especially, and it's not driven by the money or the success or anything like that. Can you dive into a little bit more details about when you think about projects, when you think about designing some component for one of your businesses or things like that? What is sort of the foundational mindset that you have going into this?
Well, any work I do or any work challenge I'm taking on is always from the lens of the other person and seeing how are they impacted. Is this valuable, and is the work I'm doing valuable in the end of the day? Now, when I've had some jobs, I'm just like, okay, I'm just building this app or technology for someone. But I do think about, well, when I'm building it, is this the most delightful? This is experience people want to go through. Is this actually? And I always give feedback to, even if it's not my place to say. It's like, well, pushing in, well, is this really important? Yes or no? Like a lot of times when I'm building tech, it'd be like, well, I want this feature because I just say so, or I want this and I want this aspect just because I think this would be valuable. Well, does this actually move the needle? Does this actually make a difference? So it's informed everything I've done in terms of, is this important to the world, important to someone who wants this to exist? And so, yeah, across all the different things I've done, from my first startup to my second startup to now my third startup, right. It's been a awesome journey to and it's always something I reflect on and push on. It's like, well, until I actually feel that this is the right approach, that this is actually going to make a difference, I don't jump into it right away.
Makes sense. And I know a little bit about Cloaked, so why don't we dive into that a little bit and sort of get a bit of a backstory on Cloaked, and sort of bring that idea of how it helps people, the idea behind privacy and things like that. So why don't we dive into Cloaked? Tell me a little bit about what it is, what you see for the future of it, and helping people.
Yeah, so Cloaked is a consumer privacy company that's giving you a voice, and how all this technology, all this stuff around you, your data, how that all works. And what we really think about is, and how it all started was exactly that thinking, where how does it help? How can I help someone? It all started from how I wanted to help myself. I thought about around 2019, I started working and thinking about, well, I think about it before, but in 2019, I started actually building, was that what if my data could be really helpful to me? And I was like, well, what does my data live? What does it look like? So I actually got a Mac Mini. I bought it, put it in my apartment, and I said, I'm going to try to get all of my data to be on that Mac Mini. So I want to get all my data and put it in a box. And I wrote integrations into Facebook, Messenger, WhatsApp. I tapped into iMessage and managed to get all my text to be continuously flowing to this box. Apple Health, finance, etc. I built all these integrations to try to get all my data into this box and have a continuous stream of my data being put in there. And I have a background in AI and ML. I want to see, could I actually do some stuff to build some models that help my life? And I actually started to, where my box would give me recommendations on, well, maybe you should do 15 push-ups. You should eat this food. Or if I bought too much alcohol, it'd say, hey, well, this is my spending habits. And it really hit me in the head when I was at lunch one day with a friend or colleague, I can't remember. And at the end, I picked up my phone. I realized with my girlfriend at the time, my AI had actually had a full conversation with her, talking to her back and forth, saying, I love you, actually sending memes to her, which I thought was really funny. But I realized the power of my data if it actually belongs to me. So I thought about that for a while. I was like, well, what if my data actually belonged? I knew how much work it was for me to do what I wanted to do. I got all my data, and I'm someone who knows a lot of tech, so I could do a lot of stuff. But what if I actually owned my information? And so I've thought about that for a while, and I thought about what a lot of other privacy companies are thinking about. Let's change businesses where you can actually change their databases, infrastructure, put user data in the hands of a user. And I realized, well, I thought about that for a while, but it's like, that's a really hard problem because a lot of people are trying it. It requires you to change businesses one after another and convince them. And it hit me like a train last summer when I was on a run that, well, what if I actually start with consumers and without needing to change businesses, work with consumers first? And so what I realized, and I started doing some research, is I'm like, oh, but consumers don't care about privacy, et cetera, and data, nobody cares about data. And I found out, well, 79% of America does care about their data. They're upset, outright angry with how their data is collected, sold, and misused. And there's a general sense of creepiness and pervasiveness on how big tech treats you and how all this personalization works out. And when I took a lay of the land, I realized privacy companies today, there's the DuckDuckGo, Say Mine, MySudo, Niva, a lot of these companies are existing. They're all giving you a hammer and wishing you good luck. And we think about it too, I think about it a little deeper. Well, I'm on the upper end of tech and I don't actually effectively use a VPN. Well, good luck to everyone else trying to use any of these tools.
Right.
So, and it boiled down to a sentence I thought a lot hard about was people like things to be customized. They like things to be personalized. They don't like the feeling of being compromised. And I was like, wait, so what does privacy actually mean? Well, I realized I stratified into 3 layers. There's the outermost layer, which is what we call security, the fraud, the encryption, et cetera, how you're being attacked. The second layer is what we define, or I define as privacy, where it's where does your data live? What does it look like? Who has access to it? What does it mean? But we're starting at what we call the innermost layer, which is comfort. It's the cognitive point in which you understand that, hey, I don't like this. It's the moment when you share your email, phone, address, credit card, etc. And that's the moment where you're like, that kind of uneasiness feeling. And that's where we're starting there, V1, is that how do we give you control on how your data lives, where it's being shared, but starting from the point of your identity. How you're sharing your information about you from every single website you go on, every single person you talk with. What we do is we spin up a brand new version of you, brand new email, brand new phone number for every single instance, like a phone number for every website or every person you meet.
So every interaction,
we spin up a new version. So that gives you granular control. So in V1, you can turn things on or off. You can set schedules that, hey, they can't bug me after, like, if I give a number to my boss, he can't bug me after 5 p.m.
That's version 1. You're saying.
And that's version 1. Yeah.
Okay.
And exactly. And then we're looking in V2, growing to helping you in these relationships. You can control what data lives, like delete all the data off Facebook or remove information older than 2018, setting simple rules that Cloaked as your moderator actually enforces. And then working long-term to the idea of a win-win relationship where businesses and consumers are working together without compromising the individual, but giving businesses access to information, but maybe not the exact information. Consumers choose what they want to share. So maybe not my exact location data, maybe my approximate town or my state. The idea is giving access to data that consumers can have to personalize their experiences on tech, but businesses can't store or at least can use to build much richer experiences. And that's what we want to work towards.
Wow. Working towards what seems like an awesome platform in the near future.
That's the goal, but really always being consumer led. And even our ethos is that consumers should own their own data. And we've actually set up our infrastructure in the same way, where every user, when they sign up for Cloaked, we actually create a brand new database for them outside of Cloaked. And that's where all the data lives. So theoretically, down the road, you could uninstall Cloaked. We'd mail you your encryption key and would say, here's your data. Wow. So that's the future we want to work towards. So it's like, truly, this is your data.
This is incredible. So this is again coming from a place of, how do I help somebody on the other side?
Yeah.
It's not coming from, how do we pull the most amount of revenue out of this opportunity and stuff like that. It's, yeah. And so everything's foundational from there. It's building backwards from the goal that you want to achieve from the human side, and working it backwards of, how do we serve people in front of us?
Absolutely. That's what we want to do. And there's a much bigger opportunity if we can help people and without punishing businesses. A lot of privacy companies actually punish businesses. If we actually make that working towards a win-win, then we actually have a much bigger revenue opportunity, but it has to start from the consumer side and working with them. Wow.
That's incredible. So looking for someone that's thinking about starting their own business, or people that are watching that are either just starting their business or maybe in their 9-to-5 trying to figure out a way to jump to the entrepreneurship side of things, what types of advice can you impart on them? What can you give them? Some reinforcement, some reassurance, anything that you can think of that would really help them? How do you come up with a business idea in the first place? Is it just spontaneous? Do you sort of have like a research aspect to this, to vet things before you kind of dive into it?
Well, I'd say, to answer that question first, exposing yourself to a lot of things is really important. I know a lot of people who want to jump into entrepreneurship, right? And it's great when they're really young, get into start a business. But you think about starting a startup or a business, it's a long-term commitment. You're building a business for not a year. It's not a side project. This is a 10-year plus thing that you're embarking on. And so this is something that you want to love or enjoy doing. So part of that, I say, is that as you're young, instead of like, you can start things and try to make, like, if the goal is to make money, then you should make that your clear goal, as opposed to trying to make a big business in terms of how you scale it, et cetera. Because I know there's a lot of D2C and drop shipping. You could choose that. It's an opportunity. That's perfectly fine. And you set the goal you want to. If your goal is you want to make a big impact, change lives, or even if you want to make a lot of money, then you got to think about, well, exposing yourself to more problems. I always say that for somebody's younger or somebody looking to switch, put yourself in a lot of different environments. Try, like, as you're going out to events, if in your own job, shadowing meetings and things department areas you're not aware of, or even in your current job, seeing some of the pain points your own company is not solving. Why they're not solving it is that this is kind of this brand new opportunity. But I'd say always focus on putting yourself in opportunities to learn and exposing yourself. And there's a couple of nuggets I always say is also always investing in yourself. There's a quick jump is that I have an idea and I want to go ahead and go dump $25,000, $40,000, $50,000 building an app or doing this or that. I'd say, one, you want to test the problem that you want to solve first. And you don't need code. You can use low code or no code, or you don't really need to do technology. Technology always optimizes or makes a solution faster, automated, right? You could even for my business, I could, but it's a technology business, but I could have done one at a time, buy like a phone number and like email it to someone or do something like that. But even for something that's not a pure technology business, which most companies aren't, right? Unless you're like, for us, we are selling the technology, but a lot of times your technology is solving the problem, and you could automate technology that makes it faster. So you could like I say, manual MVP it is what I often say. If you manual MVP something, you're the guy behind the scenes stringing together like Slack or Google Forms or Google Drive to help you do something manually. Like you might literally go run and deliver something to somebody, or email someone to make an order seem like it's automatic. I'd say the idea is that you want to test and see if there's a market, if people like it, and if this is a problem is real. And You either expose by being in situations where you see the problem, or you test. And I remember I told someone once who wanted to figure out whether he should put a locker in bars and say, oh, I'm making an app that people can lock their stuff while they're bar hopping. I said, great. What you should do is go to Target, buy one of those 6 cube drawers, buy 6 safes, and stand there. Get like a nice looking Squarespace site, and no app or anything, and actually test to see if people are willing to do so. And I think that's like taking that manual approach is a much easier way for you to learn first. So learning is the first key before jumping into trying to scale or fear how big this is going to get. Do you really understand the problem? Like for Cloaked, I don't have the paper anymore, but I had that a large Pew Research study that became our Bible, where I fully understood because we wanted to survey and understand the problem. The good thing for us was that privacy has become such a big problem that thousands of people are researching, writing about it, and have done so much research, surveys, and understanding that we can piggyback off of it.
Wow. And so just go back for a sec. MVP is minimum viable product, right? Yeah. And I like that approach where you're not investing too much time, resources, people, all this stuff in order to just have a massive failure at the other side. You're actually just saying, let's incrementally test this as we go and see what the results are. See if there's a market there, and then we iteratively move to the next level at each step of the way.
Yep, you want to iterate and move to the next level. And it's really, as I said, figuring out that you need to learn. You want to learn the space, become a master of what this problem looks like, who's in the space, and if this is something you're excited about, which is the most important thing. If you are, then it's going to ultimately fuel your advancement in it. And being a bit disciplined and not jumping right away to building the technology, but learning the problem will do you a lot of favors. That's
right. You hear a lot of these stories of like video game designers or companies saying, they're diving all in, headlong in, but they realize at the other side that it's not a viable product. There's no audience for it. It wasn't tested. It wasn't focus grouped or something like that. That's really interesting. And so when people are coming up with an idea for their business, what are some of the problems that people can experience if they don't just, first of all, think about it, and then, what's the first step that people can do if they're working 9 to 5? What's the first step that people can do to come up with a business idea?
To come up with a business idea,
yeah,
right? Working 9 to 5.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about research. You're talking about stuff like that. People think that they need to jump in full bore, just quit their job and dive right in. Well, that's probably a really good idea if you can stand it. What are some things that people can do right from their desk or on the weekends, late at night?
Well, one of the things you can always look at is trends. I actually have a funny example. My friend who is now actually making a good amount of money making resumes.
Making resumes.
He started his business, and he's on Fiverr, and he's making a good amount of money just editing, proofreading resumes. And I think part of like thinking of business opportunities is amplifying your strengths. So like what do you find that, I kind of do that, I have this shortcut to this, or I know how to do this, like I know some stuff in Excel really well, or even something that you have some knowledge of, you can dig a little deeper. Because I think, for example, my friend, he knew that after he's worked a lot of jobs, and he's like, and he went to business school. So he's like, I know how to put my resume together pretty well. And he looked in, he researched on Fiverr, he's like, well, are there any people who are doing resume editing? And just Googling, figuring out, like, there's some candidates. I think he paid and got his resume edited by a couple. And it's like, these are kind of shoddy. And so I think he started tinkering, put a little bit, got a couple buys on Fiverr, Upwork. You can do some of these things. Fiverr is a good one that's growing for just to tinker and see if people are willing to pay for something. And he did that, and he started his business. So for business ideas, I think if you're starting from, I just want to do something, well, you can look at trends. You can research you can go to Fiverr, go to Google Trends and see what are people searching for, what's been some recent things, and kind of go through a rabbit hole. If you're just trying to start from, I have no idea. Usually you have some inclination about something you want to do. I'd say as you dig in deeper, learning, reading about that, it leads to something else in a journey, leads to something else. Eventually you might say, wait, that's interesting. I want to see if I can do a little test on that.
Yeah. And making sure that you're reinforcing the passion, because as an entrepreneur doing something, that's your own thing, you're gonna need to be doing this overnight on the iPad while lying in bed in the middle of the night or whatnot. It has to be something that you can do even just when you're not even, when you're on vacation or something. You can't stop thinking about it.
Perhaps. Absolutely, right? I think you're dreaming about it. I've dreamt about it, even Cloaked a few times. I woke up this morning about shoot, I missed one thing on that. Let me go work on that. But it's part of you.
Yeah. And so how do you, with so much going on and, you're, CEO, you're working with Creative Chaos, RallyCry Ventures and stuff like that. How do you find time to sort of make sure you're sharp with your skills? And what do you do? Are you disciplined in that way? Do you set aside time for you to, let's do a little bit more coding? How involved are you with things like that? How do you stay sharp with the skills that you need to grow this business and, stay both technical and higher level?
So I'm unique in that case. I know a lot of people on my track, because now I'm beyond. I've been an architect, I've been a director, and even of technology. In that track, I've always been. One of my secrets, I've always stayed sharp. I've always stayed close to coding. For example, I know a lot of people get into managerial, etc. positions like, I haven't coded in 4 months or a year or 3 years. I've just been focused on being a manager. And one of the things that was really made me a successful leader was that I always rolled up my sleeves. When I'm working with someone, because I had a technical background, I could write code. I'd paragraph program, I'd work with someone. And that always made it so that I never lost my skills in programming. So right now in Cloaked, our team's growing rapidly. We're 15 people, 16 people, with a few more as contractors who are transitioning to full-time. So growing pretty quickly. But I'm still our lead backend engineer until the 2 new people we just hired are joining in the next month or so. And that's because I was able to start and move very quickly because I had the skill set, as opposed to being rusty. So it helped us a lot. But I'd say one thing that made me unique on my how do I stay sharp, I'm always watching or reading from, as you say, you talk about YouTube, watching YouTube videos, reading articles, and you see always a funny mix. You see my YouTube feed I see business videos, and when I'm doing nothing, I'd watch one guy talk about the new way to do Postgres database stuff, like how concurrency is handled in Postgres. And I think it's interesting. Will I actually use it anytime soon? No. But sometimes it comes in handy. And I remember in the pandemic, Swift UI had come out. So I actually said, you know what? I'm gonna learn Swift UI. It might be interesting. Oh. And our mobile app in iOS, for better or for worse, is using Swift UI, which is a new thing.
No kidding.
That's
interesting. And
I'd say I'm always looking to just learn something new or read, and setting aside a couple hours or an hour when I can. Right now, we're at our current growth stage. I've not been able to do that as much besides just reading things. But my hope is that once we get over some of the hump of the things we're actively trying to launch, I think we'll go back into reading, learning a lot more, a couple hours a day at least. I think that's how it keeps me sharp. I think probably in few months time, I probably won't be actively coding for Cloaked, but I'd still want to be involved long term. Yeah. At least a good understanding, because even the act of building gives me a lot of ideas. And I think that's always helped me, is that when I'm building something, I see the inner workings, it gives me ideas on instead of just doing how things work today, what if I rethought all of this and thought of it in a more elegant or more user-friendly way of doing something?
Sort of like these micro innovations that you're picking up along the way. And this goes to reinforcing the idea that you really want to find something or discover yourself, finding these little places in your life where you're like, man, why am I watching this topic so much? Why am I doing this so much? I have a real interest for this. That may be a good sort of avenue into discovering what may be your next business, or maybe a little niche of that topic that you're so passionate about.
Yeah, I think about watching YouTube, people watch random things. I was like, well, if you notice yourself a trend on something, maybe it's something that you might be passionate about or can explore or tinker a bit more. Even if it's video gaming, right? If it's you might actually enjoy streaming, give it a shot. And if you don't like it, well, okay, that's fine. But if you say, you shouldn't also say, okay, I started streaming, but I don't have tens of thousands of viewers. Well, I think you got to work at it and find what is your strengths, what is your personality that you can really lean into. It's really always about, people talk about how do you fix your weaknesses. Mm-hmm. The shortcut to business is just how do you amplify your strengths.
I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah, you're making me think a lot while we're talking here. This is great. I think we have a comment that just came in. Let's see what.
Oh, really?
Gooners has said, I can relate a friend of my rig. I think this is not related to us. I don't know where that's coming from. It says, I can relate. You told me a story recently when we were talking that you, at the start of Cloaked, the idea part of it, you came from a background of startups in the tech space and relying on pitch decks and presentation and getting in front of the right people and all that stuff. But you said something that was pretty significant. You said, get rid of the pitch decks, find someone, talk to them one-on-one, really tell them and share with them who you are, where you come from, all that stuff. Can you dive into that and how it relates to Cloak?
Yeah. So in my last job, I was actually, and I still technically am, do more of an advisory role. I was a VC. And as a Boston-based VC, we see a lot of pitch decks, and we people, and there's a kind of mantra. Even we went to BAPS, and this the pitch deck and the presentation is a big factor. What I learned as part of the fundraising process outside of Boston, San Francisco, et cetera, was that the pitch deck is not what people don't want to sit through a presentation, especially at the early stages. And it's all about the story you want to tell. And I realized there's a balance between, like, my whole fundraising process was, it's the 80% charisma you hear, like, oh, you have to be charismatic. And then it's 20% of the depth, the grit, your understanding. And that can only come strongly as part of a story. And part of your story is you really highlight the opportunity in terms of what the problem is, how big it is, and why you are the one to solve this. And that comes best when you just have a conversation and tell a story. And I realized when our pre-seed investors just say, ditch the deck, it made a big impact. And my brother and I, who's my co-founder of this business, we learned really kind of how we told our story and what our individual strengths were. I realized when pitching was, I can maintain the energy and the charisma with someone, but I kind of shut down a bit of my brain, and I'm kind of full out there mode. And what his is, he'd stop, analyze the microfacial reactions or what people's backgrounds were and what they might be more attuned to. Huh. So when they're kind of leaning into something more, he would actually bring in the right exact point that they're looking for. But I would focus on making sure that it's all one story we're telling.
Oh, that's interesting.
And we had a nice dynamic between the two of us, and that really helped. That helped us a lot.
Wow. I'm just remembering with some of the stuff that helps me in my business with marketing, you're not talking to a massive people. You're talking to one person at a time. How do you connect with that one person? And they're human. It's not a wall of numbers or faces out there in the ether. You're talking to people. Like, how do you connect with those people on one-to-one? And the idea of ditching the deck is speaking to that. You're speaking to someone that has a life, has a family, has a job, not as much time, whatever. They want to hear the value up front, get to the point, and see if it's right for them to invest.
Yeah, that's exactly. And one thing we did is we had like 10 bullet points. I didn't have like a rehearsed line, but eventually the bullet points, I said the story so many times, it became effectively like, oh, nobody could tell. I was like, at that point, it's kind of rehearsed where I told the same story. But the good thing is that since it was natural, if somebody's paying attention to something more or less, and it's like, oh, skip that. I don't care about how big the problem is. I want to hear exactly how you're solving it. I could kind of skip to exactly what they want to hear.
Interesting.
Because when you do a deck, the big part is you're forced into a specific narrative, which, like, I have to do this, I have to do that. And if someone says, skip these slides, throws you off completely. But when it's a conversation, you're like, oh. So
that's interesting. So you're able to, because you're ditching the deck, so to speak, you're able to calibrate to the room, you're able to calibrate to the person's background, the situation, things like that. Time, maybe there's only 4 minutes that you have and you want to just condense the interesting.
Digging into Cloak today, I'd say I used the mid-level length of explanation. There's like one step further, I could go even longer in how I explain Cloaked. There's one way I can make it even shorter if you're like, okay, you got 1 minute, 30 seconds. And it's like, and I just kind of roughly know, okay, touch upon these points.
Right. And this goes back to a little bit more of that conversation we had a little while ago about, you went a long way with getting eyeballs onto Cloaked based on the idea and the story behind it.
Oh, absolutely.
Can you dive into that a little bit? I think that'd be really interesting for people that are like, man, I need to have I need to have this sort of equipment, or I need to have this first before I launch this, or I need to whatever. Tell us a little bit about how far you got just with for lack of a better word, idea.
So so in 2019, 2020, as I said, I built that AI ML model, etc. But none of that code at all is actually in Cloaked. That was all my way of R&Ding and trying to understand what is the problem. That's my discovery. It's like, what is going on in the world? But actually for Cloaked, the only thing we had was the architecture diagram. And then I made a diagram that showed like, here's how it worked as a technology. And that's it. And we had we even when we pitched for fundraising, we didn't have a deck by then. And at that time I was still in the deck mindset. And we put together a deck and really just kind of honed in on the idea. So for me, it was what I realized when fundraising and talking about it was I need to really lean into why is this a problem? And for my space specifically, and most actually, why do people care? There is a value of care. What's the future? And I think surprisingly, my whole journey of fundraising, I realized people kind of work in two spectrums in fundraising. Either like you shoot for the moon, but you have no way of getting there. And it's, you're like, okay, this is so big. I have no idea, or they're really narrow. And I think VCs are also kind of attuned, see that there's a nice golden area when you have a big goal you want to hit, a big lofty vision, but you have a thought process of how to get there. And it's builds on top of each other. And I think that's what I really did in my idea side, is that I had a thinking or an approach of how to go from where I am today towards a little further where I would be from there, a little further from there, moving a little further there and showing how this would be involved to getting towards my big vision. And I kind of had a journey that I think would work, and not based on just here's user numbers, but if users can love this, we could do this. If people can love that, we could work on this. If love that, and then here's the future we could enable. And so painting that picture of where we want to be, and then having the discipline of saying we're going to do only this to begin with, helped kind of create that journey for us, and which made it a little easier to invest. Which is like, okay, they're going to work on this first and just this, and prove that people like it, and that's a good place to start.
Interesting. So sort of like a logical, reasonable explanation, and setting proper boundaries instead of just saying we're going to the sky and trying to be all salesy and overly pitching and stuff like that, to where it becomes unrealistic and out of bounds altogether. So you're really demonstrating, the value, keeping it within reason. And
you want to paint the picture of where you want to go, so you don't want to lose the vision. Okay. You got to tie it, because people love that you're thinking, like if I just said we're only going to give you a new email and phone number and this identity, and like that's it. I think that's my pitch. And it's like, okay, that sounds good and great, but what's next? I was like, well, I don't know. We'll see and build on top of it, or maybe we'll do like I'll say, well, add credit cards next. Like you shouldn't have too much horizontal. Like there's only so much horizontal growth you can do, where you can add more features, etc. We have to do some vertical growth where you're just like, I'm going to evolve to the next stage of my business, the next stage. So you do want to show a healthy goal that you can accomplish, but have a logical way of getting there.
I love that. And that applies not only fundraising, but also just, talking to potential clients and things like that, or you know what I mean? It's just, it makes a lot of sense. And how did you figure out how to construct that sort of story, construct that horizontal versus vertical framework? Was it just through experience? Was it through talking to people? Is it just a feel thing, or is there something someone can, is this something that people just need to figure out over time? Or is there some way that people can kind of start thinking about this the right way?
I say it's experience. So the cheat code is to listen to people like yourself, or you're sharing things like this, people watching and reading things online. Mm-hmm. You can cheat some of that. But from experience learning this was, like I remember my first startup, I actually went ahead and sorry, somebody entered the room. In my first startup, I actually had this where we started our first version of our product, and we built all these features and said, okay, great, now we're going to launch it and people will use it. And that ultimately failed. And a hard lesson learned was I launched again next summer, and I reduced all the features to like one. or two. And I made the product much more simpler, but I made it a lot more accessible. And I think that shaped a lot of my thinking going forward, where it was like, well, reduce the amount of things you're trying to do it really well, and make it very accessible and easy for someone to digest. And I think that came out in the storytelling as well. It's like, okay, we're going to do a couple of things, and we're going to do that well. We're going to make it very easy for someone to understand and grasp. And then we'll talk about where that will go. And I think that carried from my previous startup experiences. And then even when I was a VC, I heard a lot of pitches, and people pitched me all the time. And I see, and the ones that worked well was when there's a problem that you're solving that you could point to. And then there was a founder entrepreneur that got a good head on their shoulders, puts a lot of work in, but also really, it's not just hard work. It's also the smart intelligence, and you're doing intelligent work. You're testing, you're learning, you're failing, and you're tweaking and modifying accordingly. And I think that was a big, when I saw that, I knew that, okay, to somebody I'm talking to, like, I'm sure they would like to see that I spent a lot of time learning. I spent some time tinkering. I knew they'd like to see that I failed some. I always bring up my second startup, which failed because not like part of it, as we're positioning ourselves, and part of it, some bad co-founders. I learned the hard way how you grow. So I know people like to see that someone because if everyone's just been smooth sailing, then some investors will have a little bit of nervous because, like, what happens when they hit a roadblock? And I'm like, at this point in my life, I've seen so much failure that it's very hard to phase me. It's like, okay, well, we got this challenge. Well, I'm sure we can get over it. So I've seen the experience. I see what people respond to well, and I think that helped as part of our fundraising, but also really how we structure this business. I want to move systematically, and I feel this time or third time around also that I've learned so much in the past that, like, this feels a lot more strategic. It might seem like, oh, so much going on, a little bit of chaotic, but I'm like, behind the scenes, it feels like, wow, feels a lot more disciplined. Even on the surface, it might seem more chaotic.
Yeah. And, just hearing you talk a little while ago about how you reduced the number of features and expanded upon the ones that were most useful, and you made it more accessible. It sounds very similar to one of the biggest companies in the history of the world, Apple, where they get criticized a lot of the times because of their lack of features, lack of whatever it is, could be horsepower, all that stuff with their computers, perhaps. But they do something they do something really well, and that's combining the stuff that people really need and limiting and knocking off the rest of the stuff, and combining it with a great story, and really diving into what people really want to be doing, which is, it's tying it with themselves. It's expanding themselves. It's, being creative. It's moving, enriching their lives. That's the story that Apple sort of instills in people when they buy their products. And very similar to what you were just saying, cutting off the stuff that's unnecessary, but expanding upon the stuff that people really want, or stuff that people may not even realize that they need yet, but they will.
Yeah, that's I think there's like aspect of accessibility. How do you make sure that someone can really easily latch onto this? Or as you've got a big idea or something you want to do, what can you do to make sure it's really easy to understand? Like, I always lean into we talk about cloaked and privacy, and it's like, we're putting data back in your hands, etc. That's a lot of it goes over the head. And it's like, well, I sometimes say, like, for someone, it's like, imagine for every single website you sign up for, I give you a brand new phone number. You don't have to manage it or anything, but now you don't give your information out anywhere you go. And it's like, that's like at least accessible and makes sense. And like, that's one of the few core features we're starting with.
Got it. So you mean accessibility, not only in terms of like putting it in the hands of people, but also in terms of whether they can grasp it in the first few seconds or not. That's really interesting. That makes a lot of sense. Very cool. Well, I think we should dive into Ira Jaan. Did I pronounce that right?
Ira Jaan.
Ira Jaan.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that. Really interesting. I want to hear about where this idea came from, how you have the time to do all this awesome stuff, and what the future is like, or looking like, for this foundation.
Yeah. So foundation's a big passion of mine. I know long-term, I want to, like, when I don't say retire, I think I'm going to be doing this my whole life. But I want to, when I'm done building or doing business, I'm going to probably just spend the rest of my life on nonprofit and trying to help. But that's always been passion. And that's how I balance kind of my entrepreneurial pursuits, passions, and then my personal, how do I help the world passion. And I try to blend the two together as well to make sure that I both are always helping people. But on a pure people who are struggling or in need, that's where my nonprofit comes in. And then how I balance it, especially, is that I try to set specific hours or days. Like on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, evenings are specific nonprofit days. Saturday mornings are my another nonprofit working day, and that's kind of how I time box. But in terms of how the idea came about, it's a bit sad. But my fiance, my late fiance, she passed away, and a big part of my life is that we both wanted to see how we could help people in their people who weren't as fortunate. She grew up in a really tough environment, had nothing, and really taught herself. And so we both had this love for, like, how do we give people the opportunity to chase their dreams, give them a chance to do something that they want to do in life, even if their starting point was not as equal as someone else's. And so after she passed away, I didn't have the energy or thinking to actually do it. And her mother kind of sprung on me. She filed the paperwork and said, "Hey, I created the nonprofit." And I was like, "What? I didn't think about this. I thought I'll do this like 10 years later. I'm not in the right headspace, whatever." But then when she handed me the paperwork, she said, "Okay, go figure it out." It gave me the kickstart I needed and said, "Okay, I'll figure out how this works." Just like everything else, I was like, I'll figure out. I've never went to the Philippines. I went to the Philippines. It was lucky I had some support from her family and from her family even over there to help with language, etc. But it was a really good starting point. Like, I went there, surveyed what we're gonna do, started building some relationships, and very quickly started saying, "Okay, can I build?" And we raised some funds and actually went ahead and built that first school, the first learning center. And happy that even that journey, we learned a lot. I remember I fired my first staff after a year when I found out he just wasn't that useful. He's been okay, but it let me learn about the new staff we hired, who've been amazing. They've been work great with children, work great with even adults, and have built really good relationships. And so it's been an awesome journey. Along the way, I met some amazing people. One of our big donors we met with through a connection as part of my entrepreneurial journey. When I was looking for a job, I remember I met someone who we connected with well. I didn't take that job, but we still connected and chatted. He connected me to a friend who we are in a similar journey, and he liked my foundation, wanted to be a big supporter. So it's like, you never know who's going to be a supporter for you in whatever pursuit you do. And so he and I worked together, and he wanted to build our second school and fund it. So he made a big donation towards funding our second school. And even my second school was a whole journey. I went in, I surveyed a prospective site, built a relationship with a local nonprofit, found out the local nonprofit was completely disorganized, and that second project ended up falling through. We didn't actually get to start it. And so I went back to the drawing board, went to my connections and said, "Hey, it's another opportunity for a site. We've been fundraising for this school, but we want to get the project going." And we found another partner who I'd met on one of my earlier trips. And now we're really happy that school is going to be built real soon. The videos and pictures are on the website, but it's construction's underway, and it's going to be a very large, massive project, about over $35,000, $40,000 project for a 3-classroom building, for 100 students, primarily even girls who are either underserved or have no access. And so this will be serving that whole community. And this is actually second is no longer in Capas, Tarlac, which was the original second school. It's Maganda now. I'm going to circle back to Capas, Tarlac. The reason why Capas, Tarlac was a huge issue is the government got in the way. And we found as part of my whole nonprofit journey, I realized how hard people make it to help others. And everyone's got their own selfish motive. We even learned, like, okay, we handshake some deals and we say, "Hey, you can take some credit and say, yes, I thought about bringing this school to the community, etc." And we're like, "Fine, you can have some credit." So you can say, "Yes, we brought this US nonprofit to help us and work with us." So I learned some of that tactics to do, but it led us to now the second site, which is almost done. Will be done by this fall. And I'm excited for that opportunity. And yeah, I'm going to keep on going. Our big goal is to start working now with other nonprofits and bring some of the curriculum we put together, some of our thinking process, our strength in like technology, to build with them on either their school sites or their projects, and then along the way build our own future learning centers / schools. I'm pretty proud that we probably have the only 6-year-olds in the country that know Slack, Zoom, Google Drive, etc. Know how to actually build and collaborate in Minecraft together. And we really focus on teaching kids career paths beyond what's provided out there: web design, video production, graphic design, etc. Putting them in a path to be exposed to more opportunities and building them skills, or upskilling people who are like in their late 20s, 30s, etc. Where giving them, like, we had one woman who was 55 and came to our center to learn Excel, advance her skills in Excel, and go back to her own job and actually raise her position there. So that's why it's like mixing not only children, but also adults, upskilling adults and teaching children. And I want to just keep building more schools and partnering with more nonprofits to extend our reach beyond what we built.
Man, that's incredible. Thanks for sharing that. I want to now ask you, the theme of this has sort of been failure, hasn't it? It's sort of, I want you to talk, give me a little bit of insight about the power of failure, because it's, just to give a little bit of background before leading into this, our conversation has revealed that as much effort as you put into something, the failure is going to be part of whatever thing you put your effort into. And you get a huge benefit out of learning from those failures and those stumbling blocks along the way that just sprout and just ignite something even bigger than you thought of before. Can you talk a little bit about failure as it impacts what you do and how it's part of what you do?
I think I've seen a lot of failure in a lot of different aspects of my life. And I think that at this point, there's no fear, because I'm like, what's the worst I can do? I can fail. Right. And like, that's as long as I'm still around and I'm not like, I think strongly about skydiving. On one hand, I'm like, this sounds really exciting. The other hand is like, well, failure means I could die. So I think about, like, there's some aspects where I kind of balance, but in every other regard, there's no fear. And it's because when you do something, you have to accept that there are two outcomes. When you have some success you can build off of, or you fail in regard and you have to learn from it. And in either way, you know that there's going to be one or the other. And you have to accept also when it's like somewhere in the middle, you're like, okay, well, something's not working. Let me understand, recognize why it's not working. It's a failure you can learn from. And I think that the dream that everything's gonna be rosy and will succeed like you think it is never ever the reality. And the virtue of putting hard work into something means that you will have challenges. And I think there's the adage, why did you do X? Well, because somebody told me I couldn't do it, so I proved them wrong. Well, I think there's always an interesting second side to that story. When somebody tells me, oh, you can't do that, it's because there's some truth to it. Maybe it's too hard, or you don't have the capabilities, but then there has to be a conviction, not that you can prove them wrong. It's the conviction that when you do see that wall, that hurdle that other person told you the reason why they couldn't do it, or they didn't tell you why, they just said you couldn't do it. When you face that wall, are you okay with failing, taking a step back, learning, and either getting around it, going under it, or just saying, you know what, this is the wrong wall I should be tackling. We do something completely else. That's like maybe adjacent. You're acceptable of that. I always joke that if I wanted to dunk, I'm 5'6.5" that I'd say that I could. And I just I know that I'm not going to succeed, but with a little bit of energy and a lot of failure, I think I could eventually learn how to do a dunk. It'll take a lot of time, a lot of energy, and that's why I've not done it. But I'm like, who knows? In 3 years, things go great, and I have a lot of time on my hands. I might practice, but it's a conviction that I'm okay with it not succeeding the first time, or second time, or third time. Yeah, so I'd say accept that you're not going to succeed the first time or the fifth time. It's okay. But be wise in some of your decisions, in the sense that that's why I say you do research. Like, you want to have an understanding. You want to run smaller tests. So fail faster. You don't need to fail hard and say, I'm going to put all my money in GameStop options. Like, there's some bets you can make, but they should be informed. Like, even GameStop, I didn't put GameStop options. I bought GameStop stocks, but I had a complete trust that if it goes to zero, I was like, I'm okay if it fails, but I do have an inkling that, you know what, the upside is huge if it goes big. And and even small decisions in life, you accept the failure, but be informed about that, if that failure is going to be okay. Like you can swallow that failure.
That's really well put. And failure is sort of like a skill set. I'm just sort of realizing this, isn't it? It's sort of like you become more accustomed to it and you start to get a little bit excited about it because you know that growth is happening. Something bigger is just around the corner. Sort of like, I hate to say that, but not like excited for the next failure, but maybe, maybe that's one perspective of it, but you kind of understand that. But the other perspective is that keeps me driving behind what I'm doing. And maybe you is sort of like, man, when you're like 90 years old and you're looking back in your life, you don't want to go, what if? You don't want to think like, man, what if I just done this like I said I was going to do? What if I just, taken that opportunity? And what if I just left my job that I was miserable in for the past 35 years and actually done that thing that I was dreaming about every single time?
Oh, absolutely. I think that what if is a big factor. And I think there's the one dichotomy that people's like, what if I quit my job and just did my dreams? I say, you can make the plunge if you have enough conviction. And if you don't, that's okay. Do smaller conviction things. Like you can do your dream in smaller doses, try it and see if like this is something you really enjoy. And it might mean putting more hours. After work, you do a couple hours of like, if you want to become a painter or you want to draw or sing, right? Or anything, like do a little bit, do in half an hour, right? And math, right? Anything more than 0 is a % increase. So if you do it for 2 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day, or an hour a day, that's still going to move you enough to actually learn if there's something you want to do, fail to actually see that, did this actually work out, and give you an opportunity to go and reach out, talk to people and learn from it. And I'd say even when you're working on something on your side, never be afraid to ask for input or say that, hey, I'm just tinkering. Like a lot of people kind of live in their own heads for a while.
Sure.
Immediately when you're working on something, don't be afraid to talk about it. For Cloaked, we did a ton of market research calls with people before we built much at all. And what we done is that the product wasn't ready to demo. I could demo it to you live and works great. But at that time, nothing was demoable. So we had like a screen recording that had a voiceover in the screen recording. That's 2 minutes of like a very hard coded demo. Wow. And I used that to gauge people's reactions, thoughts, what they liked, didn't like, and hear kind of what comes to mind. And we did like every day at a market research call with somebody else. And like, it was my way of like testing and learning before I went ahead and got all the product ready. Because at that point, it's kind of too late.
That's right. And just, yeah, man, I just hearing you speak, I'm forgetting about my previous question, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I remember what it was hearing you speak, that the biggest failure for why people don't live their dreams and do what they are dreaming about is just the failure to take that first step. Think of that first step. What is that first small incremental thing I can do right now, not tomorrow, not next week, not planned out, but what can I do right in this moment to begin that journey, to take that first step? It's something like, it's some astronomical figure. It's like 90%, 95% of regrets in life are having to do with not taking that first step, whatever that is.
Oh, I feel every day, even in personal things. I feel a lot more buffer 2-3 years ago. Then I lost a lot of muscle mass when I got shoulder surgery. Then I got into my next startup and I feel like my muscle mass is withered away. And I was like, and I gained some, like my weight is equalized, gained a little fat, lost some mass. And I was like, well, I want to go back into full working out and everything. I was like, shoot, I'm not finding the time, either mentally wise, because I'm mentally drained, or physically, I ran out of hours. I'm like, well, recently I started saying, okay, I'm going to do 10 push-ups every hour or 20 push-ups every hour.
Every hour. Wow.
And so I've been doing 20 push-ups every hour. And what I do is I just hit the hour thing on my Apple Watch. And it's like, okay, hours up, middle of a meeting, I turn off the camera, do 20 push-ups while somebody's talking. I'm like, that's a good start. And I did it for like, I've been doing it for a week. I was traveling and I stopped it. I'm like kind of kicking myself. But I'm like, you know what? It's okay. I'll get back into it. And I'm like, tomorrow, I'm going to be back into day 2 of it. I had 4 days of not doing it. And so I'm like, okay. And so it's just like, it's every aspect. It's okay. Make it small, make it something I can at least start with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it was last year, the year before, I challenged myself for 30 days to do 50 push-ups per day. Yeah. No, no matter what, you have to do 50 push-ups. And man, just that, it's not the physical side of things, it's the mental side of things. It's like
the mental side. That's the actually physical. Physically, I think we could do it. It's just mental.
Yeah, it's a mental challenge. It's mostly a mental thing. I'm curious, what books do you find yourself reading that inspire you? What types of books are you reading? What do you like to read?
I have a few books all sitting in the corner, all related to products. But let me see if I get some. I got an interesting. Shoot, a couple of my books are now downstairs, but two books. I'd say one, Hooked, is a great book to read by, I can't even pronounce the name, EIR. Like,
does that have an orange cover on it?
It's a yellow cover, I think.
Yeah, yellow cover. Yeah, I read that.
It's great. I'd say for everyone, it gets into human psychology and how products play a role in people's, like, there's a trigger, and then there's an action, then there's a variable reward, and then like it's a really interesting loop of how people think. Hooked is a great book I recommend. There's also the Everyone Knows 0 to 1, which I'm pretty proud. Peter Thiel's an investor for us at Cloaked. But I'd say 0 to 1 is a big book. And there's a few there's a lot of books on how to build products. I can't remember the author. I have it downstairs. How to build products that people love. But a lot of product books. Personally, I'm actually reading this, which is actually a crazy story. But it's the Gita. I've never been that religious, actually much at all. And this actually is not a religious book, but it's actually the core tenet of Hinduism. People mix Hinduism as religion with all the other God aspects, but the core of Hinduism is all about you do you, which is that you, like, God is within you, and you are you live your life, not based on what this God says, that God says. It's all about what you do. And I was actually stumbled upon this book in a funny journey because I was watching that zombie movie that just came out on Netflix. And I saw the character's name was Gita, and one of the Indian, that was like the side character named Gita. And I was like, I don't directors specifically choose names. And I wonder why do they pick that Indian name? And I was like, I knew what Gita meant, but I Googled Gita to just kind of see what is some history of the word, just for fun. Like, this is what I mean. Or just like, if you see something curious, just like be always curious. Like, I was just curious about it. And I Googled Gita, and I was like, oh shoot. Because Gita, I can't remember the direct translation. It means like epic poem or song or story. And the idea is that the most famous one is about Arjun, my namesake, the original Arjun. And it's the most famous story in the Hindu religions about the story of Arjun. And this book is all about him asking questions about life. Like, what is the purpose? Why do you do what you do? And it's really the God Krishna, he talks about, well, it's you always want to, like, a life's about activity. You have to do things. You can't be inactive. You're doing a disservice on yourself. Like, you want to be out, you're born to be doing things. And it's about paying attention to yourself and things that you're doing, but also about helping. Like, part of you helping yourself is, and if God's within you, you also want to help other people, because it's also an extension of you and the people around you. So you want to be thinking about the people around you. And so I'm just reading right now that, and he's just asking really interesting questions. So that's my current book I'm reading. But Hooked is one I'd say everyone should read. It's a really starting a bit.
Highly recommended.
And any discipline, even non-consumer, even B2B or anything else, it's a good one I swear by. And this is not for everyone, but it's an interesting book because it's nothing religious at all in it. It's really just about how do you think about yourself, your thoughts, the way you fit in society. And it's like the biggest tenet I love about it is, like, you don't have to be a monk to have salvation. Like, there's this myth that you have to be a monk and give up everything. And that's what I kind of found interesting, is that Hinduism doesn't say that. It's just like, it actually says you can be a businessman and have salvation. So it's like, it's just the way you live your life, as opposed to you don't have to give up everything. So I thought that was cool.
That is really cool. Yeah, I'm finding myself gravitating towards, for a long time, I was gravitating towards books about the nuts and bolts and the strategies and things like that. But the biggest benefits that I'm getting out of books are reading about the inner game and things like that, because so much, it's amazing what you can do. Well, if you have the strategies and the techniques and all that stuff, it doesn't mean a hill of beans unless you have, yourself to reinforce it and to actually go out there and do it. And so I think people underplay the power of this sort of the theory, the hypothetical side of things too much. I really think people should focus a lot on that and really take these people who are thinking in the outside the box, that aren't thinking in strategy, but they're thinking about psychology. They're thinking about, self-fulfilling sort of things. I think we should all take these people more seriously a little bit more, because it's helped me tremendously with my business. Yeah, absolutely.
I fully agree. Is that when you're better in tune to how you think, how you operate, and even your ebbs and flows, and when you're feeling kind of down or up, and how you interact with others makes it's pretty important. It's always the adage, right? Unless it's a joke about dating, right? Unless you can be happy with yourself, nobody's going to want to, like, the person you want to be with is not going to date you. So part of you is thinking is that how can you be happy, have a lot of strength in the things you're doing today? That'll also, like, opportunity is two things, or sorry, luck is two things, right? Preparation meets opportunity. So yeah, it's not that, well, I get lucky with the right thing. It's like, well, you're consistently pushing yourself, you're preparing for the thing. And when opportunity strikes, you jump and try it. And whether it fails or not, you're trying. And eventually luck is you find the right fit.
I like that. And that's really cool. I want to hear you talk about a little bit about the curiosity. You started talking about always be curious. Can you kind of dive into that a little bit?
That's been my mantra for everything, is that I feel like I get along with like a theoretical physicist to like a marine biologist to a artist. I think for me, I love hearing and learning just what a historian, because I think I just enjoy so many different things in life. Just trying to read and just have some sort of appreciation, which is why, like, I can hold a conversation with most people, because I've always just been curious. Well, why does something work like that, or how does something work? I was thinking about this with a friend last weekend or a weekend before that. We were eating soup, and I was watching the liquid fall out of the soup, and I was just curious. I was like, why does liquid fall out of a spoon? You're like, oh, well, because, gravity and this and that. And I think, well, why? Like, why is this? And they're like, oh, Arjun, that's kind of stupid. It's like, well, I was like, well, we could actually live in a world where it doesn't fall out, right? You're like, you have to imagine what if something worked differently. And scientists actually talk about it. I said his example, the scientists have modeled the entire universe, and they can, as a big massive mathematical equation, they can fit in your t-shirt as a whole universe if gravity didn't exist. So you've actually modeled like everything of like, what if how the universe would work if gravity didn't exist. But with gravity, it's the biggest like unknown that throws a wrench in everything. And so it's like, well, if we actually could model how the universe would work without gravity, but we live in a world of gravity. So you're saying like, oh, it just works that way. Well, we could live in a world without it. So I was just thinking about it. And I think it's a good exercise to always be curious about the things around you, why something works the way it does, how does something exist, and whether something should be like the way it is today. By always questioning it and then learning. You don't have to also question and say, I'm going to go change it. Well, you can learn and appreciate how something is done today. Right? If I want to go get into painting, I'm just like, I want to go build a beautiful painting, or I want to make the best thing. Well, appreciate how shadowing is done today, how shading is really appreciated, or like it's a joke if you can spend a lot of time drawing a mug. Like there's a lot of appreciation in what goes into it. And I think that's always been my curious mind, is that I want to always see how is something done, and then along the way ask why something done. And so I've always said yes to everything. I tell a lot of people who are young into the career, personal boundaries is great. Focus on, yes, I want to have time for myself, etc. That's good and all. But when you're young, the one big benefit is you have the time, you have the energy. So you should say yes as much as you can to opportunities that you might find interesting, or like, and if you're not, you can always exit, but give things a shot.
Love that. That's a really great insight, man. So I guess we'll wrap this up. I just want to tell everyone where they can find you. Cloaked, what's on the horizon for Cloaked? How can people find out more about that, and also the foundation?
Yeah. So Cloaked, our website's cloaked.app. We have a new website coming out soon, but right now you can sign up for our waitlist and see a little bit about how Cloaked works. We have our upcoming people we're going to pull off from the waitlist for July and August. So if you sign up, and you can also email me or reach me, I'd be happy to get you off the invite list. But we're trying to stay in alpha, really just exactly for the same reason I said today, to learn. Because if I just build a product, put it out there in the hands of everyone, we won't be able to get focused feedback. So part of being off the wait list, we force people to give us 15 minutes a week for feedback, which allows us to learn. And somebody's feedback is like, I didn't use it. Doesn't come top to mind. Great. We learn from that too. Like, why do you not care about this? So that's why we're kind of being selective, so we can actually learn from people easily, as opposed to just looking at random sporadic data. We can actually get focused feedback. So we have a private beta coming out this fall in September, October. If you want to put your wait list, well, that's going to be a much wider audience, going to put more people in, and being able to actually digest from a bigger group. Then hopefully launch public next year. Cloaked.app, you can reach me on LinkedIn, linkedin.arjunb.com. Directly takes you to my LinkedIn. So you don't have to figure out how to spell my name. You can find me on LinkedIn, connect me there. Always happy to text. I'll happy to respond to email or LinkedIn, or if you find me on Twitter, you can just search my name. My handle is not something you can spell out. I got to chat.
That's awesome. Well, that's really good. So always be curious, embrace fear, and don't be afraid of failure, no matter what. It's going to happen, but you're just imagine the growth that's going to come out of it. And so that's it. So if you or someone you know really needs a boost, a kick in the pants, just to get the next step going, share this episode with them, reach out to Arjun or me and make it happen. We know you can do it. I just want to say thank you so much for jumping on. This has been awesome, learning a ton from you and just hearing the insights and where things are going for you. Super happy. Absolutely. And we'd love to have you come back on again.
For sure. Thanks for having me, Nick.
All right. Absolutely. All right. So we'll leave it there. Thanks so much. Thanks. And we'll see everyone soon.
Yeah.